She was the no-nonsense state school teacher who won the attention of government ministers 12 years ago. Then she stood up at the Conservative Party conference and denounced ideas she said kept poor children poor. She then won fame as the UK's strictest head teacher, running a state school in London where pupils walk in silence in the corridors, and her results were exceptional. And in October last year, Katharine Birbalsingh was made the chair of the UK's Social Mobility Commission, and she made her first speech today. Let's have a quick listen.
We want to move away from the notion that social mobility should just be about the long upward mobility from the bottom to the top, i.e. the person who was born into a family, say in social housing, and then becomes an accountant or a banker or a big CEO. There's nothing wrong with that view of social mobility, but it's not enough.
Well, I'm now joined by Kathrine from her home in northwest London. Kathrine, good evening.
Good evening. Hi.
Let me start by asking you just a simple question. What's wrong with a poor kid on a council estate wanting to go to Oxford, or being a CEO for that matter?
There's nothing wrong with it. It's to be encouraged. I've taught these sorts of children all my life. But what is wrong is when a child doesn't want to go to Oxford and wants to do something else, that's something that we don't admire, that we don't celebrate the young people who achieve so much, who aren't necessarily going to Oxford and Cambridge or aren't necessarily becoming top bankers or lawyers in the city. This idea that we should make everyone into a top banker is bizarre. I became a teacher and I've lived a very fulfilling life. I love the children. I'd hate being a top banker in the city. And having this sense of someone isn't successful unless they're earning lots of money is the wrong way to think about life. And it's only the very few who might do that. The many, on the other hand, are completely ignored by this interpretation of social mobility. And we don't recognize that people can be socially mobile at all different parts in life. They might have short-term abilities. They don't have to have this idea of, I've come from the bottom and therefore now I'm right at the top and I'm a millionaire. Most people don't actually want to become millionaires, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
OK. Now, look, education is obviously key for people getting on, moving up the social mobility ladder, so to speak. But you've done this job for a while now. Which of these three, apart from education, would you say is currently the biggest single obstacle to social mobility? Race, sex, or geography?
Oh, gosh. That's interesting. When you said with which three, I didn't know what three things you were going to say. Well, I don't know. I mean, that's not really... It's not really which is the biggest one. You want to make sure that all young people have the possibility of accessing the skills and the knowledge that's necessary in order to allow them to enter into a career of their choosing, where they'll feel purpose and fulfillment in their lives. Now, an issue with geography, for instance, is this idea that in certain parts of the country, in the north, for instance, there's this idea that you've got to pack your bags and go to London in order to find fame and fortune. When actually what you'd hope is that everyone, if they want to, could stay near to their families and their friends and also be able to fulfill their potential and their ambitions. Similarly, if you're from a different ethnic background, you want to be able to hope that you would be able to fulfill your ambitions. And we very much want to look at the people who buck the trends. In an unequal society, is it possible to be socially mobile? Yes, because we know there are people who do that. So why do they do it and how do they do it? And look at the ideas behind that and try and amplify their success so that others can learn from them.
OK, I suppose the perspective of all that question, which perhaps I should have been kind enough to explain, is the government thinks it's all about geography these days and race and sex are less important. It's where you are and increasing opportunities where you are. But you answered that well. Let me put this to you just finally. It's about you, if you don't mind. Ever since you came to prominence in 2010, you've been infuriating your critics, if you like, because you've refused to respond to the sort of stereotypes perhaps they might like for you. You're a teacher, you're of Indo-Guyanese heritage, but you're not left-wing, you're, by admission, conservative with a small c, and you approve of traditional things like discipline and singing Jerusalem at school. I just wonder whether you thought that sort of stereotyping still holds kids back these days.
What kind of stereotyping?
The stereotyping that people put upon you. You know, they look at your colour, they look at your job, and they say you have to think and vote in a certain way.
Oh, well, I'm not sure it necessarily holds kids back, but I do think that it is a problem. I think that's right. I think that I'm not allowed to be a small c conservative because of my colour, because I'm a teacher, because you know, I ought to be on the left. And I do think that's the kind of unconscious bias that people will say, those very people themselves will say that it exists, and they don't realize that they themselves are victims of it because of the way in which they won't allow me and others like me, black conservatives, to think for themselves. They don't like that. But, you know, in terms of children, you know, there's key things that I think impact on a child's life, help them to be upwardly mobile. One is family, two is their school, and then three, when they're on the other side, roots into the workplace, what can they do? You know, apprenticeships are one of those things that really we should be putting so much time and effort in. And if we only see social mobility as being the ones who get to Oxford and Cambridge, well, then we forget about the apprenticeships. I mean, imagine saying to a young person, well, you know, I don't think you're going to get into Oxford, so forget it, your life is over. I mean, this is ridiculous, right?
Yeah, powerfully argued. Katharine, very good to talk to you.
Thank you very much for having me.